have an interesting discussion with Georgia Shaffer. Now, most of you already know who Georgia is because you have read her bio prior to choosing to join this conversation. For those of you who are with us live, please feel free to type your questions in on the Facebook page, and we should be able to see them here if technology works like we hope it will. As I mentioned on the Facebook page earlier, we've been having little gremlins in the computer world today, and so we hope that all of this works as planned. But if you're with us, I hope that you will say hi in the place on the page to say that. Hopefully, then we'll at least know we've got some folks. Others join in later. They watch it not live. But Georgia Shaffer was part of our class seminar teaching team for many, many years and a part of our certified personality training also for many, many years. So let me bring Georgia into our conversation, and you're going to learn more about her as I do and as we discuss the topic. But Georgia, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, it's a treat. And I think that what you're going to offer to our viewers today is going to be really important. And I've got at least 3 people saying hello. So we know we do have a few viewers. And just for the little technicalities, for those of you who are on Facebook, when you ask a question, would you please start with your name? Because it only shows me on the screen Facebook user. So I don't know who you are. So I'd really appreciate when you do ask a question, if you would include your name with the question. So I asked Georgia specifically to join us today to talk about the different types of personality assessments, because if you're teaching what we call the personalities or the Wired That Way assessment, it's likely that people in your audience are going to be familiar with other systems. For example, I was speaking last month, well, actually it was January now, in Dallas to a group of orthodontic office staff members. And one of the offices had just brought in a very expensive consultant who was administering the Enneagram. And if you don't know what that is and you're teaching the personalities, you might have a deer in the headlights look. And we don't want to have that happen. And so Georgia has a lot of experience in many of the key systems, and we're going to get into that in just a moment. But Georgia, I want to start today by asking you, how did you become familiar with the personalities or the Wired That Way system?
I don't know if it was 1990 or 1991, but I attended class. And that's when I learned about Wired That Way, or the personalities. And I had already been credentialed for the Myers-Briggs type indicator, so I was sold on the personalities. But then I learned to know the one that was used in class.
And why do you use it? What do you like about it?
It's simple. It's real simple for the client, the person you're working with as a people helper, whether you're a coach, a counselor in the ministry, but it's also user-friendly for the person giving it, because I work with a lot of coaches and counselors on using different assessments. And by far, they all say this is the easiest one to grasp. Some of them are much more difficult to learn. And if you, as the coach, the counselor, people helper, don't know it and aren't comfortable with it, then you're not going to help your client as much. So invariably, I hear over and over, I feel comfortable using Wired That Way.
Well, thank you. Now, you mentioned at the beginning there that when you became aware of our material, and let me just mention that the Wired That Way personality assessment is something that my father created back when I was 9 years old. And I am sad to say I'm 61 now. So that has been around for a really long time. And I always like to say it's been proven by the test of time. But when you became aware of that profile, that personality profile, Georgia, you said you were already familiar with Myers-Briggs. So let's start with that. How did you become familiar with that, and what do our folks need to know about it?
At some point in graduate school, I was introduced to the Myers-Briggs, and then I went and I became certified to use it. And when I had to do original, my thesis, I used it for my research because it has a lot of research behind it. And so statistically, I could do it. So I'd already proven that the personalities influence everything when we're working in our strengths, from job satisfaction to job turnover. So I really liked it, and it just made people understand their strengths so much better, understand their communication styles. And so that's how I first came into it.
So what do people need to know about Myers-Briggs? It's a lot more complicated system.
Yes, it is. And it has 16 personality types. Now, in recent years, I figured out how to streamline it a little bit. I'm going to hold this up. But it has 4 different opposites: introvert, extrovert, sensing, intuitive, and so on. But if you go down the center, how do they get their energy? Well, the extrovert gets their energy from others. The introvert is recharged by, being alone. And then you just go down. Where do they gather their information? The intuitive likes to see the possibilities. They'll only pay attention to the facts that relate to them. The sensing likes, the details. And then there's the thinking and feeling, and that's how they make decisions. And then there's the judging and perceptive, and that's the lifestyle. But those words alone are confusing to people because we don't use, when we think of judging, we think of somebody judgmental. So these terms were, coined back in Carl Jung's time, years and years ago. So one of the drawbacks is you got to introduce, well, what are they talking about when they're talking about sensing and judging and the perceptive type? So that's one of the drawbacks. And then you take those 8 opposites and then they combine them for 16 personality types. Now, the thing for the Myers-Briggs is they're evaluating inner preferences, where you get energy, where you get how you look at make decisions. Can you see me, Marita? It says I'm live, but all of a sudden you disappeared. So I don't know if I'm live. Oh, you disappeared. So anyhow, what was I saying? Oh, I was talking about Myers-Briggs is a personality system like the personalities, like DISC. They're all personality systems. But what the Myers-Briggs goes for is your inner preferences. The way you prefer to get energy, the way you prefer to look at, the decisions you make. But people have trouble, then they combine it to ISTJ, and people have trouble remembering that letter combination. And that's one of the drawbacks.
So what's important for the people who are joining in on this conversation? What's important for them to know about Myers-Briggs?
I'd say number one, that is, it's evaluating their inner preferences. And it's important that there is some overlap in the fact that where you get energy. We talk about that in the personalities or wired that way, whether you're recharged by solitude or other people. The other difference is the Myers-Briggs has a lot of data. There's a lot of research. It's loved, so to speak, in the educational world and sometimes in the corporate world. So I never try to talk people out of the personalities. If a client comes to me and they've
out of
already
the personalities or out of Myers-Briggs?
Out of any of them.
Okay.
If they know one and they're familiar. Now, when I do empowering assessments, which is a group coaching class, I start with Wired That Way because it's the easiest, it's the most simple. And invariably, we just ended it after we'd meet once a month for 6 months. And Wired That Way was the favorite of a lot of people because they felt comfortable and their clients felt comfortable. So yeah, thanks for correcting me on that.
Well, I just wanted to clarify. Since you mentioned your assessment class that you do, can you just mention that a little more for those who might want to participate in that?
Yeah, I'm a licensed psychologist in Pennsylvania, but I keep my license current, but I'm no longer practicing. I'm a professional credentialed coach. And what I was realizing, I coach a lot of coaches, is that they were sort of snowballed by all these assessments. And they didn't know, well, which one should they use for their clients? What would be most valuable? And so already I was interested because I was introduced to Wired That Way, the personalities 20 years ago. And so I dove deeper into the disc and, of course, the Enneagram, which we'll get to, and strength finders. And then there's emotional intelligence assessments. So that's what we cover. We cover 4 different personalities assessments, 2 different emotional intelligence, and what was strength finders, I should say, is now Clifton Strengths. But then that helps them understand themselves, because whatever role we're in helping people, we have to have self-awareness. So just going through that course, people take all the assessments themselves, and many times they come out saying, I've gained a greater insight about myself, not to mention, of course, learning how to help others with them.
So, do you do one type or one assessment a week or a month? I mean, excuse me, one assessment a month?
Yeah, I just do one assessment a month because a lot of my clients are busy, but they have to take the assessment before we meet. And then during the session, I have one of them pretend they're the client and I show how I would use it with people. I give them tools, I give them PowerPoint presentations that I use, I give them handouts and those different things. So I give them a lot of tools and strategies.
Now, talk for a moment about the difference in the cost. What's the cost for Myers-Briggs assessment?
The cost, I think my hard cost, I think, is $25, $26. But I have to join Myers-Briggs. MBTI.org is the official site. And as we talk about later, there is no official DISC assessment. And of course, you guys are the official Wired That Way. But I have to pay $200 a year just to get those assessments. That's not covering my costs. And then each assessment. So on my website, I have that link, but I charge $35. I only charge a few dollars more. But it costs me around $30 for each client. Now you can have your client absorb it, but somehow you have to get those costs covered.
So,
And
which one do you want to go to next?
let's do DISC.
Okay.
Now, DISC has
Hang
4
on just a
personalities.
sec. Hang on, Georgia. Let me just ask our viewers, because we do have quite a few people watching along with us today. Do you all have any questions on Myers-Briggs? How many of you, are any of you teaching Myers-Briggs? How many of you have taken the Myers-Briggs assessment? Or do you have any questions about Myers-Briggs before we move on to DISC? See, okay. We're not.
You'll have to read the question.
Yeah, I'm looking. There's
them.
nothing that's come in so far. So wait, yeah, no, I don't see anything yet. So if someone does, we'll maybe do a question and answer time. Okay. Someone says, during this health crisis, understanding personalities is so helpful. Helps to understand the stress factor added to the situation and how it is perceived. That's Carol Miller. That's my cousin Carol who says that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because during adversity, which we're definitely in a challenging time, people sort of dig their heels, whatever their personality is. And whatever differences we have, they seem to get exacerbated because that's our comfort spot. So it's really important we're aware of the different personalities and how they're going to cope and handle this time of uncertainty.
Okay, so Daphne Smith says she has taken Myers-Briggs and has a hard time remembering her letters. Billy Bauer says he has taken Myers-Briggs. And so we do have some that have some input there. And let me mention, for those of you who are not watching live, we are recording this on March 25th in the middle of the coronavirus crisis. And perhaps that's why we have such a good attendance today, because a lot of people are at home.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. That's where we can connect online.
Yeah. So let's go on then to DISC.
All right. So the DISC 2 is a personality assessment. And by the way, I encourage people never to use the word test, because when we say a personality test, that elicits the part of our brain that, like in high school or grade school, where there was a right or wrong answer. And the truth is, all these personality assessments are self-report. What you put in is what you get back. So the DISC personality assessment measures our observable behavior. I said the Myers-Briggs is, our preferences, our internal preferences. The DISC, which is why I think is popular in corporations and so on, because it's how you're apt to see, your coworkers behave or react. And so I always wondered what the DISC stood for, and it stands for the 4 letters. And different assessments, by the way, I have yet to figure out what's the official DISC assessment. There's all kinds of companies out there, just like Myers-Briggs, but there is an official Myers-Briggs assessment. But the D is dominance, and these are the people, that the challenges that they can come up to. The I is the influencers. These are the people who can sell you on things. Then there's the S, the supportiveness, personality who comes in and does whatever is needed. And then there's the C, the conscientious. Now, some versions of the DISC will use steadiness instead of supportiveness. But so we have to be aware of those. But again, it will show how we tend to act out when we're angry, how we tend when we're overloaded. So that is what is valuable for the DISC. It too has a lot of research, not as much. The Myers-Briggs by far is the most researched and reliable and valid. As far as costs, the cost for me is by far the highest.
For DISC?
I have on my website.
The cost for DISC is the highest?
For me, I can't find a version I really like, because there's a million versions out there. But yeah, it costs me $40, and I think I have it on my website for $49. Yeah, that's my personal highest. So you think of that with a client right there. There's, $40 plus your investment of time. So sometimes I pass it on to the client, like I do group coaching, and sometimes I just filter that, figure that in on the price of the group.
Yeah. Or if someone who's using a personality assessment, they would, if they're using it individually with a client or in a coaching session, they would wrap that into the cost of the session.
Yeah, and it's added value too. You're giving, I always give my clients, generally I give them Wired That Way, but I give them some personality assessment, because right up front, I get so much information about who they are and, how I can communicate best with them and so on.
So as we're moving along here, for those of you who are with us, if you have questions about the system we're talking about, please go ahead and type them in. Laura is asking about, there isn't an official DISC profile, she asks, and she asked about what's the original.
I have yet to find the original. The name of the man who originally, can't think of it right now, is Thomas somebody, but he didn't come up with an assessment. He just had these observable behaviors.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Georgia, because the profile that we use, the Wired That Way personality profile is something that my father created, as I mentioned earlier, when I was 9 years old, when my mother had first read Tim LaHaye's book, Spirit Controlled Temperaments. And he did not have an assessment. But my father, who is the melancholy, the analytical mind, after he read Tim LaHaye's book, he then went and created this profile. And with very few changes, we're still using it today.
I didn't know that story. I knew Tim LaHaye had a similar theory, but I didn't know he never did an assessment.
No, I mean, he may have at some point. I'm not aware of it. If any of you know, please feel free to chime in. But certainly in that original book of the Spirit Controlled Temperament, there was not an assessment. It was just a listing of strengths and weaknesses. And my father created this assessment.
Well, and the Myers-Briggs, it was all those names and that idea, that theory was Carl Jung, but Isabel Myers-Briggs and her daughter created the assessment. So I guess when you think about it, that's not unusual.
So what else do we need to know about DISC? I mean, I tell people that the letters in DISC, the DISC, and Billy's online saying he used personality puzzle, which became the Wired That Way profile. Exact same profile, just a different name. But he used that, he says, at Liberty University, but he uses DISC for life coaching, which he does do, I know. And so when I tell people about it, when they ask in an audience, I always say, well, those four letters directly correlate to the four groupings that we use, which we either call sanguine, choleric, melancholy, phlegmatic, or popular, powerful, peaceful, perfect, or yellow, red, blue, and green.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, I don't care what you call it, because the label is not what's important. It's about relationships.
Yeah. But again, the DISC is observable behavior, which I think Wired That Way does our inner preferences as well as our observable behavior. So, but the four types, yeah, there's definitely a correlation.
They definitely correlate. Okay. So what else do we need to know about DISC? Where is it primarily used these days?
I would say in corporate America, although at my church, I go to a relatively large church, they use DISC for the leadership, anybody who's in a leadership at our church. But we also have a counseling center, and all those in the counseling center use the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So even in that church setting, you have, the preferences for each.
Well, we certainly sell a lot of the personality profiles to schools, to universities, to churches, all kinds of groups.
Yeah. Yes, again, it's easy to pick up. And the other thing I like about it, we didn't talk about speaking or presenting, but with the Wired That Way, when I go out to speak with the Myers-Briggs, I can't do that in 50 minutes. I can't always break it down, and DISC isn't always that simple either, because they allow three preferences depending on the version of the DISC you get. So, but Wired That Way, you can cover it in 50 minutes. Those attending get it, they have a handle on it. And the other thing is, I would say with Wired That Way, I have over the years seen so many people, they understand maybe the idea of the personalities for themselves or their coworkers or maybe their spouse, but they never think about their children. That's like a whole new thing, which of course you guys have been,
that's a key part
talking about for. Yeah, absolutely. But that's like a novel idea to a lot of people. Oh, I didn't think about my children having a personality.
So you want to move on to Enneagram?
Yes,
I think it's kind of one of the most complicated, but it seems to be much more popular these days than it was when I was really active in teaching the personalities, and especially with millennials.
Oh, absolutely. It goes back to the Desert Father. Some people say it has an occult background. But truth is truth, and it has been used for spiritual direction. I have some friends who are big on spiritual direction, and that's what they use, the Enneagram. But whatever the reasons, and the millennials have grasped onto it, it is extremely popular now. And I was telling you, Marita, earlier that a friend of mine went to a conference, and she said at this conference, they weren't even talking about a particular assessment, and everybody would come up and say, hey, what's your number? Because the Enneagram has numbers 1 to 9, and each one of them correlates to a different personality type. And one of the main things the Enneagram's looking at is what's your primary motivation. And I can briefly go over some of those.
Yeah,
but
do.
yes. Okay, number 1, that's me.
Okay.
That's the perfectionist. And, we want to do things right. And we ourselves want to be better and grow. But we also want everybody around us to grow. So all the strengths, like the Wired That Way, have strengths when carried to extremes,
Become
aren't
weaknesses.
refined. Yeah. Or flaws. I've had some coaches say, I don't like using weaknesses. I use flaws. So whatever you use, I use weaknesses. The number 2 is the person who is very sensitive. These are the people helper. They're always giving, and they don't always, do the self-care. So that's the number 2. Then the number 3, this is the successful person. They're very motivated to perform, achieve. Number 5, 4, that was 3 I just talked about, the performer. Number 4 is the individualist, the romantic kind of personality. They love beauty, art. 5 is the real analytic thinker. They investigate. They many times are good in risk management because they can see, if you put in a fountain here in your pool and you put this kind of fountain, kids could trip over it versus one that's, flush. So they'll see all that kind of thing. Then the number 6 on the Enneagram is the questioner, the skeptic. And then the 7, one of my friends is this, and she just loves to have fun. That's her basic thing. These are the adventurers. And the 8, these can be the snowplowers. They're very much boss-like and like to be the top dog. And I have one friend who's like this, and every now and then she'll come on real heavy. And one time there was a group of us at the shore, and she said to me later, I snowplowed everybody, didn't I? And she did. She just knocked us down. And then finally, the 9 is the mediator, the peacemaker, the negotiator. So each of these numbers have a different motivation. So like the motivation of the 1 is our motivation. We want it perfect, or we want to do it right. And so that's how.
So what would be the motivation of the snowplow?
The snowplower, they just want to be in charge.
Okay. So that would align with the powerful choleric, obviously, and the 1 would align, obviously, with the perfect melancholy.
Yeah, because the number 8 doesn't want to be controlled. That's their greatest fear, to be controlled by others. And so many times they will snowplow just to have that feeling of being in control.
It's like I always say, I like to drive. I like to be the one driving because then I'm the one making the decisions.
There you go.
So, let's see. Daphne, no, who is it? Sheena Fleener says, a lot of young Christian women think they are a 2. Have you seen that, or can you explain that?
Well, that makes sense because we've been called as Christians to be servants of others. And number 2 is the helper. Their motivation is to help others. The trouble is they sometimes lose who they are and their strengths. They don't take care of themselves. They can burn out in service. So yeah, that's a great insight. And I can totally see that.
So does the Enneagram have a growth component to it? What I'm thinking of is, with Wired That Way, on the personality profile there, we have this part that is at the beginning that says you are here, and it talks about this is not meant to be just a label. It's meant to be, well, this to show you this is where you are. But, in a Christian setting, we talk about it being that your ultimate goal is to become like Christ, which is the strengths of all four and the weaknesses of none. And so you use the personality profile or just the concepts of the personalities as a tool for growth. Do the other three that we've talked about today, Myers-Briggs, DISC, or Enneagram, do they have that same growth component?
Well, the Enneagram, and I don't know that I can put my hands on it right now, but the Enneagram definitely has questions. And when I do it in my group, let me see, maybe I can find it right now. Like the reformer, the perfectionist. So the questions to, to be on that road to transforming into a better person.
Okay.
What are ways that I can achieve the same goal without going for perfection? What about this situation is, quote, perfect the way it is? So yes, the helper that somebody said about a lot of Christians. What do you need right now? Because the helper very seldom asks that. What is one step you can take to nurture yourself? What if you said no to something? And so for the two, that's challenging to say no, because they want to be spread thin, but the truth is they might not be called to do everything. Maybe somebody else. So yes, there's questions and ways of going deeper.
Okay.
And then the disc, they have a lot of like how when you're angry, what does it look like? So they're trying to create that level, and same way with Myers-Briggs. It's all about self-awareness. And some people think, well, that's just navel gazing. No, it's not. When you understand who you are and the gifts you have to share, that's about helping others. But you have to have that awareness of who you are, the gifts God's given you, the strengths. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I have heard from many people in the audiences over the years that they feel like that Wired That Way, or our system, the personalities, focuses on that more than some of the others. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, because I know sometimes I end, do you like to do things your way, like the choleric, or the fun way, like the sanguine, or God, and then I go through the other two. Or do you like to do things God's way? Because, yes, we have the way we like it, but are we, inquiring of the Lord and being his servant?
So for our viewers that are with us live, let me just look over, and when I go over here, I have to read the responses on my computer screen. So we've got about 10 more minutes of what we had scheduled. And poor Georgia had to spend a lot more time on this today than she expected, because we had gremlins in our computers, and we both ended up not being on the computer we wanted to be on because we couldn't get the computer to work correctly. So anyway, but it seems to have worked. So if you all are appreciating this or have any questions, love to hear from you. Sheena says, that's why I love Wired That Way, because we teach others about themselves, but then how to recognize the personalities in others. And that's a good point, Sheena. And I think that's something, I don't know, Georgia, do the others have as strong an emphasis on observing others?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because many times, like I sometimes went into nonprofit organizations with the Myers-Briggs. Yeah, that it's first understanding yourself. Like you have a team. Maybe you're a member of a team. Well, you have to understand your personality, but you also have to understand the personalities of the others in your team. And sometimes people think they're out to get you, when in fact they're looking through a different filter. So absolutely. I can honestly say they all do, because it's understanding who you are and then the strengths of the other people that you work with, because then you can, reach out to them. The Myers-Briggs talks about problem solving, and the best problems are solved when you bring in all the personalities. The person who sees the big picture, the person who sees the facts, the person who sees the consequences. and the person who's warm and sees what the impact of people are. So in all fairness, yeah, they all do that.
Okay, well, that's good.
However,
We want to be fair.
but they don't all have the Christian bent that Wired That Way does, because that's the foundation.
Yeah, now don't all the other ones, aren't there some people who have produced books with a Christian emphasis on Enneagram and a Christian emphasis on DISC as well?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know,
But I'm
like
saying
Wired That Way has a Christian emphasis, but it can easily be used in a secular setting as well.
right, right. But I think right from the beginning, your dad had that foundation.
Yes, most certainly. Yeah, and Sheena says she agrees about Myers-Briggs, but Wired That Way is so quick and easy to grasp, like the bucket of chicken Florence used to talk about. I don't know what the bucket of chicken is, but she's sitting over my shoulder, so.
She giggled.
Yeah, she did giggle on that one.
So she must remember what it is.
I don't know. Do you remember the bucket of chicken, Mom? No, she doesn't. Of course, there's a lot she doesn't remember these days, but. So Sheena says people walk out with something that they can use.
Absolutely. There is no doubt about it. They can implement it right away.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are,
in fact,
we've given a good overview of the three, the Myers-Briggs, DISC, and Enneagram. Anything else that you want to cover? Like, are certain ones better in different settings? I mean, I know you mentioned Myers-Briggs is very popular in academia.
Yeah, and the educational world, although they're in corporate America too. Well, what I do for the powering assessment at the end, I do a synopsis of all the assessments we covered and the strengths and reasons to consider each. And so for the Wired That Way, it's one of the least costly, although there is a free version of the Enneagram. It's most user-friendly for the coach and client, which I talked about. It's great for speaking. And here's the deal. Many times when I'm doing a retreat, some of those who are listening do retreats or women's events, I always start with a Wired That Way on Friday night, because sometimes people will come in the group that really aren't part of that church. And by Saturday morning or later Friday night, they're all talking about their personality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great icebreaker.
Oh, it's great. So, yeah.
Sheena wants to know, Georgia, if you have used the personalities along with Gallup strengths.
Clifton strengths. Not really. I know the DISC and the Myers-Briggs, they both have different versions for the Clifton strengths. But no, I mean, I have given the same client the personality assessment and strength finders, because strength finders to me isn't personality per se. They call it strength finders or Clifton strengths, but it's really measuring talents. And their theory, you think, well, why don't they call it talent finder? But they call it strength finders nowadays, Clifton strengths, is because those are the talents you have that can develop into strengths. With enough time, focus, experience, they can become real strengths. So it's not a personality assessment per se.
I'm looking at some of the comments here. And Laura says, we used MBTI in career counseling all the time, and I wish I had a dime for every time I had to clarify that it was descriptive, not prescriptive.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one thing. Myers-Briggs, I think I have a copy of the book. They have all kinds of books on what the different personalities tend to go in career-wise.
So, yes, but go ahead.
No, it's just used heavily in career coaching.
Okay. All right. So what else do we need to know before we wrap up here, Georgia? And if anyone else has a question, now is your time. Type it in. You can chime in here.
I'll tell you another thing. Years ago, when I first started coaching, I would tell the coaches that I worked with, never give more than one personality assessment to your client. It's too confusing.
That's good.
I don't agree with that anymore. Because
oh, really? Here, I'm just agreeing with you. It sounds good.
Yeah, and I heard other coaches, start to say, "Oh, I give this, I might give the Wired That Way or MBTI." And at first, I thought that's too confusing. But if you understand how they all come in a different angle, usually the client in the end takes a step back, and of course, you as the coach, counselor, or people helper help them take that step back, and then they can see, oh, it sort of gets to similar things. So I no longer say that anymore.
But in general, that's probably still a good surface treatment.
Yes, and here's the thing I do say, only use the one you feel comfortable with. If you don't have much experience with an assessment, you don't have much knowledge, and some of them, like the Myers-Briggs, are more difficult to learn. Don't use with just a little bit surface knowledge, because you'll end up doing more harm than good.
Well, good. I appreciate this overview, Georgia, and I think it'll help our personality trainers. One of the things, Georgia, that you really strongly admonished me in our pre-call or our pre-broadcast call was about the need to bring the Wired That Way profile online. You want to address that?
Yeah, all the assessments that I use in Empowering Assessments have an online version. Now, some you're better off buying the book, and then they have a code in the back, because then you have the book that goes in detail. But Wired That Way, I gotta mail them a copy of the assessment, and sometimes it gets lost. And in Canada, it's a lot more expensive.
Yeah, it's very
to mail
expensive to ship them to Canada. I send them there a lot.
Yeah, and I have this group Rebuild, which is for divorced and separated women, and I have several up there. And so, yeah, it becomes a real problem. So, yes, I've been after you a lot. You need an online version.
I'm working on it. I got the rights from the publisher. I got the rights back in November. They gave me the rights for the profile, for the electronic rights, and I am currently working on it.
Good. And I'm sure a lot of people online would agree with me on that. We need an online version of Wired That Way. It just makes it simpler. The client can go in there, they get a report, and then you, as working with them, can help them. By the way, if anybody has any questions, or maybe they want to know more about Empowering Assessments, my website is georgiashaffer.com, and that's SHAFFER.
And Laura has added a link into our comments section. And remember, all of you, you can rewatch this. It'll be available just in a matter of minutes after we sign off. It will be available for you to watch online indefinitely. And remember, we have previous training sessions like this on different topics that if you look on the Certified Personality Trainer page, and we've had a great group attending. I think we've been up to 10 people or 15 people in attendance for this. So that's been a good group, and we will have more watch it afterwards. Most of these sessions we've done have hundreds of viewers. So feel free to chime in with your questions and comments even later, and you all can add your comments of thanks to Georgia. And George has added in a comment to the Rebuild link here. And Daphne says she would pay for online access to be able to administer, share it with her clients. And that's what we're talking about. And Sheena's put in another suggestion there. So read through the comments, you all. Thank you for joining us tonight. And we're going to go ahead and sign off. But Georgia, I appreciate your sharing your expertise with us as someone who works really closely with all four of these different personality profiles. So thanks for joining us, Georgia, and everyone else. Have a good night.
Thank you. And if you have a question, you can email me from my website.
Email you from your website if people have questions. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Georgia.
Okay.
Have a good night.